The golden autumn leaves danced outside the tall windows of Ashford Palace as Crown Prince Alexander sat in his private study, staring at the official documents spread across his mahogany desk. At 32, he had always carried the weight of the crown with dignity, but today felt different. His wife, Princess Elena, had been acting strangely for weeks, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Elena had been his childhood friend before becoming his beloved wife 5 years ago. Their love story had captivated the nation of Valdoria, a small but prosperous European kingdom nestled between Switzerland and Austria. She was the daughter of a respected diplomat, intelligent, compassionate, and beloved by the people. Their wedding had been a fairy tale, watched by millions around the world. 3 months ago, the palace had announced with great joy that Princess Elena was expecting their first child. The news had brought celebration throughout Valdoria. Church bells rang, streets were decorated with flowers, and the people rejoiced at the prospect of a new heir to the throne. Alexander remembered how Elena's eyes had sparkled with happiness when they first learned the news. She had placed his hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "Our little miracle." Since then, Elena had thrown herself into preparing for motherhood with the same dedication she brought to her royal duties. She had converted one of the palace's smaller chambers into a nursery, personally selecting every detail from the hand-carved wooden crib to the soft yellow curtains that would filter the morning sunlight. She spent hours reading about child development and nutrition, wanting to be the best mother possible. But something had changed in recent weeks. Elena had become withdrawn, spending long hours alone in the nursery or walking through the palace gardens in silence. When Alexander tried to talk to her, she would smile and insist everything was fine, but he could see the worry in her dark eyes. The palace physician, Dr. Margaret Thornton, had assured them that some anxiety was normal during pregnancy, especially for first-time mothers in the public eye. The kingdom's people had been following Elena's pregnancy with great interest and affection. Newspapers ran daily stories about her condition, and everywhere she went, crowds gathered to offer their congratulations and well wishes. Children made drawings for the future prince or princess, and local craftspeople created beautiful gifts for the royal baby. The pressure of such public attention was immense, but Elena had always handled it with grace. Alexander's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his study door. His private secretary, James Morton, entered with a concerned expression. "Your Highness, Princess Elena has requested to see you in the blue drawing room immediately. She seems quite distressed." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. Elena rarely summoned him so formally, and the blue drawing room was typically reserved for important state matters or difficult conversations. As he walked through the palace corridors, Alexander noticed that the usual cheerful chatter among the staff had been replaced by hushed whispers and worried glances. The servants who had worked at Ashford Palace for decades seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Mrs. Catherine Wells, the head housekeeper who had practically raised Alexander, gave him an encouraging nod as he passed, but he could see the concern in her weathered face. The blue drawing room was Elena's favorite space in the palace, with its elegant French furniture and paintings of Valdorian landscapes. She was standing by the window when he entered, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. Her usually perfect posture seemed fragile, and Alexander could see she had been crying. The afternoon sunlight highlighted her pale complexion and the dark circles under her eyes that she had been trying to hide with makeup. "Elena, my darling, what's wrong?" Alexander asked gently, crossing the room to take her hands in his. They were cold despite the warm autumn day, and he could feel them trembling slightly. Elena looked up at him with eyes full of tears she was trying hard not to shed. "Alexander, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The weight of her words hung in the air between them. Alexander felt his world begin to shift, sensing that whatever Elena was about to tell him would change everything. Outside, the kingdom of Valdoria continued its daily rhythm, unaware that in the blue drawing room of Ashford Palace, their beloved royal couple was about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. Elena's hands shook as she pulled away from Alexander's gentle grasp. She walked to the ornate mirror above the fireplace, staring at her reflection as if seeing a stranger. "I had another appointment with Dr. Thornton this morning," she began, her voice hollow and distant. A routine checkup, or so I thought. Alexander felt his chest tighten with each word she spoke. The baby? Elena's voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to compose herself. Alexander moved toward her, but she held up her other hand, asking for space to find her words. Dr. Thornton couldn't find the heartbeat during the ultrasound. She tried different positions, different equipment, but Elena turned to face her husband, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. Our baby is gone, Alexander. Our little miracle is gone. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He reached for the back of a nearby chair to steady himself, his mind struggling to process what Elena had just told him. For months they had talked about their future child, made plans, dreamed about the life they would give their little one. The nursery upstairs was filled with gifts from around the world, tiny clothes and toys waiting for small hands to hold them. But how? When? Alexander managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. Elena sank into one of the blue silk armchairs, looking smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her. Dr. Thornton thinks it happened sometime in the last week. She said these things sometimes occur without any warning, without any reason we can understand. She called it a late-term miscarriage. Alexander knelt beside Elena's chair, taking her hands again. This time she didn't pull away, but instead gripped his fingers tightly, as if he were her anchor in a storm. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you go to the appointment alone? He asked gently, not accusingly, but with the concern of a husband who wanted to share every burden with his wife. I had been feeling different for a few days, Elena admitted. Less movement, less energy. But I convinced myself it was normal, that I was just being paranoid because of all the public attention. I didn't want to worry you unless there was really something wrong. And then when Dr. Thornton confirmed, she couldn't finish the sentence. The silence in the blue drawing room was deafening. Outside they could hear the distant sounds of palace life continuing as normal. Gardeners tending to the autumn flowers, staff preparing for the evening meal, guards changing shifts. But inside this room, time seemed to have stopped. Alexander thought about all the people across Valdoria who were eagerly waiting for news about their future prince or princess, who had no idea that their joy was about to turn to sorrow. What happens now? Elena asked, her voice small and lost. It was a question that encompassed so much more than just the medical procedures they would need to face. What happens to their dreams? What happens to the nursery they had lovingly prepared? What happens to a kingdom that had been celebrating the promise of new life? Dr. Thornton had explained that Elena would need to be admitted to the palace's private medical wing within the next day or two for the delivery. The thought seemed surreal and heartbreaking. Going through labor knowing there would be no cries of a newborn baby, no first breath, no moment of joy. Instead, there would only be grief and goodbye. Alexander pulled Elena close, and she finally allowed herself to collapse into his arms, sobbing with the kind of deep, wrenching pain that comes from losing something precious before you ever had the chance to truly hold it. He held her tightly, his own tears falling silently into her dark hair. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, grieving together for the child they would never know, the future that had been stolen from them without warning. As the afternoon light began to fade, Alexander realized they would have to make decisions about how to handle this tragedy. The palace communications team would need to be informed. Statements would have to be prepared, and somehow they would have to find the strength to share their private heartbreak with an entire nation that had been celebrating alongside them. But for now, in the blue drawing room of Ashford Palace, Prince Alexander and Princess Elena simply held each other and mourned the loss of their baby, their hearts breaking in a silence that spoke louder than any words ever could. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the private quarters of Ashford Palace. Alexander had barely slept, holding Elena close throughout the night as she drifted in and out of restless sleep, occasionally waking with tears. Now, as dawn broke over the kingdom of Valdoria, they faced the overwhelming task of deciding how to share their tragic news with the world. Sir Robert Hartwell, the palace's chief communications advisor, sat across from the royal couple in Alexander's private office. His usually confident demeanor was subdued as he reviewed the draft statement his team had prepared during the night. Your Highnesses, I want to express my deepest condolences before we discuss the practicalities, he said, his voice gentle but professional. I've been with this palace for 20 years, and I understand how difficult this moment must be for you both." Elena sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, still wearing the same dress from the day before. She had refused breakfast and barely acknowledged the staff members who had offered their quiet condolences as word of the tragedy spread through the palace. Alexander knew she was trying to hold herself together, but he could see the effort it was taking. "The statement will need to be released within the next few hours," Sir Robert continued carefully. "Word is already beginning to spread among the medical staff, and we want to control the narrative before speculation begins in the media. I've drafted something simple and dignified." He handed them a printed copy of the proposed announcement. Alexander read the words aloud softly. "It is with profound sadness that their Royal Highnesses Crown Prince Alexander and Princess Elena announce the loss of their unborn child. The princess will require medical care in the coming days, and the royal family requests privacy during this difficult time. Further details will be provided as appropriate." Elena looked up for the first time that morning, her eyes red but determined. "It seems so formal, so cold," she said quietly. "This was our baby, our child. People have been celebrating with us for months. Don't they deserve something more personal?" Alexander was surprised by her strength in that moment, even in the depths of her grief. Sir Robert nodded understandingly. "We can certainly add a more personal touch, Your Highness. Perhaps something about your gratitude for the support you've received from the people of Valdoria." Elena considered this, then shook her head. "I want to thank them, yes, but I also want them to know that this baby was real to us, that we love this child even though we never got to meet them." Working together, they crafted a new version of the statement that felt more authentic to their experience. Elena insisted on adding a line about how much the pregnancy had meant to them and how grateful they were for the love and support of their people during both the joyful months and now in their time of sorrow. As Sir Robert left to finalize the announcement, Dr. Thornton arrived for another consultation with Elena. The physician had been the royal family's trusted doctor for over a decade, having delivered several babies for Alexander's cousins and treated various members of the extended royal family. Her presence was both professional and compassionate, as she explained the medical procedures Elena would face in the coming day. "I want you both to know that this is absolutely not anyone's fault," Dr. Thornton said firmly, looking directly at Elena. "I've reviewed all of your prenatal care, and everything was perfectly normal. Sometimes these tragic losses occur for reasons we cannot understand or prevent." "You did nothing wrong, Your Highness." Elena nodded, but Alexander could see she wasn't entirely convinced. He knew his wife well enough to recognize the signs of self-blame beginning to take root. "Will we be able to have other children?" Elena asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been haunting both of them since yesterday. "There is no medical reason why this would prevent future pregnancies," Dr. Thornton assured them. "But for now, we need to focus on getting through the next few days and allowing your body and mind to heal," she explained. The timeline for the medical procedures and what Elena could expect physically and emotionally in the weeks ahead. After Dr. Thornton left, Alexander and Elena sat together in silence, watching the rain begin to fall against the windows. In a few hours, their private tragedy would become public knowledge, shared with millions of people who had been following their story with joy and anticipation. The thought of facing the world's sympathy and pity felt overwhelming. "I keep thinking about the nursery," Elena said suddenly. "All those beautiful gifts, the crib we picked out together, the mobile with the little dancing animals. What do we do with all of it?" Alexander had been wondering the same thing but hadn't wanted to bring it up so soon. "We don't have to decide anything right now," he said, taking her hand. "Mrs. Wells can close the room for now, and we can think about it later when we're ready." Elena nodded, grateful not to have to make any more difficult decisions that day. As the afternoon approached and the time came to release their statement to the world, Alexander felt the weight of his role as future king. Soon he would have to be strong not just for Elena, but for an entire nation that would be mourning alongside them. But first he simply wanted to be a husband comforting his wife through the darkest day of their lives together. The palace statement was released at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and within minutes the news had spread across Valdoria and beyond. Television programs were interrupted with breaking news alerts, radio stations began playing somber music, and social media filled with messages of sympathy and support. Alexander watched from his office window as reporters began gathering at the palace gates, their cameras and microphones ready to capture any glimpse of the grieving royal couple. In the capital city of Ashford, flags were quietly lowered to half-staff as word spread through the streets. Shopkeepers who had been preparing special displays for the upcoming royal baby instead found themselves comforting customers who wept openly upon hearing the news. The flower vendors at the central market began creating memorial bouquets, knowing that people would want to leave tributes at the palace gates. Elena had retreated to their private bedroom, unable to face the reality of the world's reaction to their loss. The palace's private phone lines were overwhelmed with calls from world leaders, family members, and friends offering their condolences. Alexander tried to shield Elena from most of these, but he knew she could sense the magnitude of attention their tragedy was receiving. Queen Isabella, Alexander's mother, arrived at the palace within hours of the announcement. At 68, she had ruled Valdoria with wisdom and grace for over 30 years, and her presence brought a sense of stability during the chaos. She embraced Elena with the tenderness of a mother, not a queen, and her own tears showed the depth of her personal grief for the grandchild she would never know. "My dear child," Queen Isabella whispered to Elena, "I know there are no words that can ease this pain, but please know that your father-in-law and I are here for you, whatever you need." The Queen had experienced her own pregnancy loss many years earlier before Alexander was born, and she understood the unique grief that comes with losing a child before birth. As evening approached, Elena faced the medical reality she had been dreading. Dr. Thornton explained that they could no longer delay the delivery, and Elena would need to be admitted to the palace's medical wing that night. The thought of going through labor, knowing the outcome would only bring more heartbreak, seemed almost unbearable. Alexander insisted on staying by Elena's side throughout the entire process. He held her hand as they walked slowly down the familiar palace corridors toward the medical wing, past paintings of their ancestors and tapestries that told the history of their kingdom. Everything looked the same as it always had, but their world had been completely transformed. The medical wing of Ashford Palace was small but equipped with the most modern facilities. Dr. Thornton had arranged for a specialist team from the capital's leading hospital to assist, ensuring Elena would receive the best possible care. The nurses, all of whom had signed strict confidentiality agreements, treated the princess with professional compassion and respect for her privacy. Throughout the long night, Alexander never left Elena's side. He whispered words of love and encouragement, held cool cloths to her forehead, and provided whatever comfort he could during the most difficult hours of their marriage. Elena's strength amazed him, even in her deepest pain. She maintained a quiet dignity that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago. In the early hours of the morning, their baby was born silent and still. Dr. Thornton handled everything with the utmost care and sensitivity, allowing Alexander and Elena the private time they needed to say hello and goodbye to their child. They had chosen not to know the baby's gender during the pregnancy, wanting it to be a surprise, but now they learned they had lost a daughter. Elena held their tiny baby girl for a long time, memorizing every small feature, whispering words of love that no one else would ever hear. Alexander sat beside them, his hand gently touching his daughter's perfect little fingers, overwhelmed by the simultaneous experience of profound love and devastating loss. They named her Sophie, after Elena's grandmother who had passed away the year before their wedding. It felt important to give their daughter a name, to acknowledge that she had been a real person, however briefly, and that she would always be a part of their family story. Dr. Thornton arranged for photographs to be taken, understanding that these images would be the only tangible memories Alexander and Elena would have of their daughter. The palace chaplain, Father Michael, came to offer prayers and blessings, treating baby Sophie with the same reverence he would show any member of the royal family. As dawn broke over the kingdom of Valdoria, Alexander and Elena faced the beginning of a new and unwanted chapter in their lives. They had entered the medical wing as expectant parents full of hope and dreams, and now they were leaving as grieving mother and father, forever changed by the brief life of their precious daughter Sophie. The days following Sophie's birth and death passed in a blur of grief, necessary arrangements, and an overwhelming outpouring of sympathy from around the world. The palace gates had become a sea of flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten notes from people who felt compelled to share in the royal couple's sorrow. Many of the tributes came from parents who had experienced similar losses, offering words of understanding and hope that somehow made Elena feel less alone in her grief. Elena spent most of her time in their private quarters, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings but struggling with simple daily tasks that had once felt effortless. Getting dressed, eating meals, even having conversations required enormous effort. Alexander worried about her constantly, watching for any signs that she was retreating too far into her sadness. Queen Isabella proved to be an unexpected source of strength for Elena. The older woman visited daily, sharing stories of her own pregnancy loss and the long journey of healing that had followed. "Grief is not something you get over," she told Elena one afternoon as they sat together in the palace garden. "It's something you learn to carry, and eventually the weight becomes more bearable." The decision about funeral arrangements had been difficult. Baby Sophie was technically a member of the royal family, which meant there were protocols and traditions to consider. However, Alexander and Elena wanted something private and intimate, not a state ceremony that would turn their personal tragedy into a public spectacle. They chose to hold a small service in the palace chapel, attended only by immediate family and close staff members. Father Michael conducted the service with gentle dignity, speaking about the brief but meaningful life of Princess Sophie and the love that surrounded her even in her short time with them. Elena had written a letter to her daughter, which Alexander read aloud during the ceremony. In it, she spoke about all the dreams they had held for Sophie, the love that would have surrounded her throughout her life, and the way she had already changed them as people just by existing. The burial took place in the royal cemetery on the palace grounds, in a small plot beneath an ancient oak tree that had been planted centuries earlier by one of Alexander's ancestors. The headstone was simple but elegant, bearing only Sophie's name, her dates, and the inscription, "Beloved daughter forever in our hearts." Elena had chosen to plant a small rose garden around the grave, wanting there to be beauty and life in that sacred space. In the weeks that followed, Elena slowly began to emerge from the deepest stages of her grief, though the process was far from linear. Some days were better than others, and Alexander learned to recognize the signs that indicated whether she was having a good day or struggling. He rearranged his royal duties to spend more time with her, understanding that their healing needed to happen together. The palace staff, who had grown to love Elena like family over the years, found their own ways to support the grieving princess. Mrs. Wells, the head housekeeper, began leaving Elena's favorite tea and small plates of food outside her door when she wasn't ready to join others for meals. The gardeners planted Elena's favorite flowers in spots around the palace where she would see them during her daily walks. One of the most difficult decisions they faced was what to do with the nursery. For weeks, the room remained exactly as Elena had left it, with tiny clothes folded in drawers and toys waiting on shelves. Finally, Elena asked Alexander to help her pack everything away, but she wanted to donate the items to a children's charity rather than simply storing them in the palace attic. As they worked together in the nursery, carefully folding baby clothes and wrapping delicate gifts, Elena found herself talking about Sophie for the first time since the funeral. "I keep wondering what she would have looked like," she said, holding up a tiny yellow dress. "Whether she would have had your eyes or mine? Whether she would have been calm like you or energetic like me." Alexander understood that these conversations were part of Elena's healing process. Dr. Thornton had explained that grieving parents often needed to talk about their lost children, to acknowledge their existence and their place in the family. He encouraged Elena to share these thoughts, finding that they helped him process his own grief as well. The international attention surrounding their loss had been overwhelming, but also surprisingly comforting. Letters arrived daily from other royal families, world leaders, and ordinary people who had experienced similar tragedies. Many shared their own stories of pregnancy loss, creating a sense of connection across boundaries of culture, class, and geography. One letter that particularly touched Elena came from a young mother in a remote village in Valdoria. The woman had lost her own baby the previous year and wrote about how seeing the royal couple's openness about their grief had helped her feel less ashamed and alone. "Your Highness," the letter read, "knowing that even princesses cry for their lost babies has given me permission to grieve openly for mine." This response from their people began to shift Elena's perspective on their tragedy. While the loss of Sophie would always be deeply personal and painful, She started to see how their public sharing of grief might help other families facing similar heartbreak. It planted the seed of an idea that would eventually grow into something meaningful and healing, not just for Elena and Alexander, but for countless other families throughout their kingdom and beyond. 3 months after losing Sophie, Elena made her first public appearance at a children's hospital in the capital city. She had been working with her private secretary to plan this visit for weeks, wanting to do something meaningful to honor her daughter's memory, while also beginning to fulfill her royal duties again. Alexander was concerned about whether she was ready, but Elena insisted she needed to try. The visit was kept deliberately low-key, with minimal media presence and a focus on simply spending time with the young patients and their families. Elena had always been naturally gifted with children, and despite her own loss, she found genuine comfort in reading stories, playing games, and listening to the hopes and fears of the families she met. During her visit, Elena met Sarah, a 7-year-old girl who was recovering from surgery. When Sarah's mother quietly mentioned that they had lost a baby brother the year before, Elena sat down beside the little girl and said simply, "I lost a baby too. It makes your heart very sad, doesn't it?" Sarah nodded seriously and then asked, "Do you think the babies are friends in heaven?" Elena had to excuse herself for a moment to compose herself, but she returned to tell Sarah that she thought that was a beautiful idea. That conversation stayed with Elena for days afterward. It made her realize that there were many families in Valdoria dealing with pregnancy loss and infant death, but the topic was rarely discussed openly. People grieved in silence, often feeling isolated and ashamed, without access to proper support or resources. Elena began researching the issue more deeply, working with palace researchers to understand the scope of pregnancy loss in their kingdom. What she discovered shocked her. Statistics showed that 1 in 4 pregnancies ended in loss, yet there were virtually no support services available for grieving families. Most hospitals provided only basic medical care, without emotional or psychological support. She shared her findings with Alexander, who was amazed by the thorough research his wife had conducted. "I had no idea the numbers were so high," he admitted. "All these families suffering in silence, just like we did before we had the courage to speak publicly about Sophie." Elena nodded, her eyes bright with purpose for the first time since their loss. Together, they began developing plans for what would become the Sophie Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting families experiencing pregnancy loss and infant death. Elena wanted the foundation to provide practical support like counseling services, support groups, and educational resources for healthcare providers. She also envisioned memorial gardens where families could honor their lost babies and find peaceful spaces for reflection. The planning process became a form of therapy for both Elena and Alexander. Working together on something positive that honored Sophie's memory helped them channel their grief into meaningful action. They consulted with medical professionals, social workers, and other parents who had experienced similar losses to ensure the foundation would address real needs in effective ways. Dr. Thornton became one of their key advisors, helping to design educational programs for healthcare providers about how to better support grieving families. Too often, medical professionals focus only on the physical aspects of pregnancy loss, she explained during one of their planning meetings. "We need to better understand and address the emotional and psychological impact as well." Elena also reached out to other members of royal families around the world who had experienced pregnancy loss, discovering a network of women who had faced similar challenges largely in private. Princess Margaret of Denmark, who had lost twins several years earlier, became a particularly important mentor and friend. Through their correspondence, Elena learned about innovative support programs in other countries that could serve as models for their own foundation. As word of their plans began to spread quietly through their network of advisors and supporters, Elena and Alexander received enormous encouragement from medical professionals, charity workers, and ordinary families throughout Valdoria. Many people shared their own stories of loss, and Elena was struck by how similar many of their experiences had been to her own. The couple decided to make their first major public announcement about the Sophie Foundation on what would have been their daughter's 6-month birthday. It felt like the right time to transform their private grief into public action, to ensure that Sophie's brief life would have lasting meaning for other families facing similar heartbreak. Elena spent hours writing her speech for the announcement, wanting to strike the right tone between acknowledging the ongoing pain of their loss while also expressing hope for the future. She wrote about how Sophie had changed them even in her short life, how grief had taught them about the depth of love, and how they wanted to honor their daughter by helping other families feel less alone in their darkest moments. As the announcement date approached, Elena felt nervous but also excited about sharing their plans with the world. The foundation represented a new chapter in their lives, one where their personal tragedy could become a source of healing and support for countless other families. It wouldn't bring Sophie back, but it would ensure that her legacy would be one of love, compassion, and hope for others walking the difficult path of pregnancy loss. 1 year after Sophie's birth and death, Elena stood in the newly opened Sophie Foundation Center in downtown Ashford, watching as families filled the comfortable meeting rooms for support group sessions, counseling appointments, and educational workshops. The center had become everything she and Alexander had envisioned and more, a place of healing, hope, and community for families experiencing pregnancy loss and infant death. The official opening ceremony had taken place the week before, with Elena cutting the ribbon while standing beside a beautiful memorial wall where families could place small plaques honoring their lost babies. Sophie's name was the first one on the wall, written in elegant script and surrounded by tiny carved roses. As other families added their children's names over the following days, Elena felt a profound sense of purpose and connection. The foundation had grown beyond their original plans, thanks to an overwhelming response from the people of Valdoria and supporters around the world. Donations had poured in from every level of society, from children who sent their pocket money to major corporations that provided significant funding. The response had shown Elena and Alexander just how many people had been personally touched by pregnancy loss, either in their own lives or through someone they loved. Dr. Sarah Chen, the foundation's director and a specialist in perinatal psychology, provided Elena with regular updates on their impact. In just the 6 months since opening their first services, they had supported over 300 families, trained more than 100 healthcare providers, and established support groups in 12 cities across Valdoria. The feedback from families using their services was overwhelmingly positive. Elena often visited the center without formal announcement, simply wanting to spend time with the families and see firsthand how the foundation was helping. She would sit in on support group meetings, hold babies in the infant memory program, and listen to stories from parents who found comfort in sharing their experiences with others who understood their pain. During one such visit, Elena met Rebecca, a young mother who had lost her son at 36 weeks of pregnancy. Rebecca had been coming to the support group for 3 months and told Elena how much the foundation had meant to her healing process. "Before finding this place, I felt like I was going crazy with grief," Rebecca shared. "My family meant well, but they kept telling me to move on because the baby wasn't really real yet. Here, everyone understands that my son was real, that my love for him was real, and that my grief is valid." These conversations reinforced Elena's belief that the foundation was filling a crucial need in their society. She had learned that pregnancy loss was often treated as a medical event, rather than the death of a beloved child, leaving parents without proper support or recognition of their grief. The Sophie Foundation was changing that conversation, one family at a time. Alexander had also found his own ways to contribute to the foundation's work. He had become passionate about the policy side of their mission, working with government officials to improve parental leave policies for families experiencing pregnancy loss and to ensure better mental health coverage for grieving parents. His position as future king gave him access to lawmakers and policymakers who could create systemic changes to support families. The couple had also established an annual Sophie Memorial Lecture, where leading experts in perinatal care, psychology, and public health shared the latest research and best practices. This year's lecture focused on the importance of acknowledging pregnancy loss in all its forms, from early miscarriages to stillbirths, and treating each loss with the gravity and compassion it deserved. As Elena walked through the Foundation Center that afternoon, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since Sophie's death. The devastating loss that had once felt like it might destroy her had instead led to the most meaningful work of her life. She still grieved for her daughter every day, still wondered what Sophie would have looked like as she grew, still felt the ache of empty arms and unfulfilled dreams. But alongside the ongoing grief, Elena had discovered a new sense of purpose and strength. She had learned that tragedy could be transformed into triumph, that personal pain could become a source of healing for others, and that love for a child who died could still change the world in beautiful ways. That evening, Elena and Alexander visited Sophie's grave as they did every week, bringing fresh flowers for the rose garden that now bloomed magnificently around their daughter's resting place. As they sat together beneath the ancient oak tree, Elena told Alexander about the families she had met that day and the progress reports from Dr. Chen. Sophie would be walking now, Elena said quietly, as she often did during these visits, maybe saying her first words, getting into everything. Alexander nodded, understanding that these conversations about what might have been were an important part of keeping their daughter's memory alive. "I think she would be proud of what you've built in her name," Alexander replied, taking Elena's hand as they watched the sunset through the oak tree's branches. "The foundation has helped so many families, and it's only going to grow and help more. Her life mattered, Elena. It changed everything." As they walked back toward the palace together, Elena felt grateful for the journey that had brought them to this place. The pain of losing Sophie would always be part of their story, but so would the love, the healing, and the hope they had been able to create in her memory. Their daughter's legacy would live on in every family the Sophie Foundation supported, in every healthcare provider who learned to offer better compassionate care, and in every parent who felt less alone in their grief because of the work Elena and Alexander had done together. The royal tragedy had become a story of transformation, proving that even in the darkest moments, love could find a way to create light for others, walking through their own shadows of loss.